That's what really blew our mind. The entire software world order is getting rewritten here. And you look at big companies as well. I mean, this is not reflected in the org charts yet. What's going to happen here? Back 10 years ago, or 15 years ago when I came to the Valley, if you weren't technical, you had to go to networking events, try and meet someone who's technical. The reality of the market is as we sit here now on this podcast, there are, thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of possible product market fit ideas and, shapes of products that could be released that would just explode.
You're listening to the Startup Podcast. This is an educational episode.
Hi, I'm Yaniv Bernstein.
I'm Chris Saad.
I'm Eric Simons.
Listeners, we can all feel the acceleration. AI is making it faster than ever to build, launch, and iterate. It's the best time to build a startup. But at the same time, it means the competition has never been fiercer. Velocity and cycle time are imperative. Today's winners seem to go from 0 to 1 in the blink of an eye. And what does that mean for you? Don't worry, we've got you. Today we're going to share actionable nuggets on thriving in this environment. And to do that, we're joined by one of the people at the vanguard of this revolution. Eric Simons is the founder and CEO of StackBlitz, the maker of the viral AI development tool Bolt.new. Eric launched StackBlitz in 2017 to simplify web development by enabling instant, browser-based coding environments. But in 2024, he spearheaded the launch of Bolt, which rapidly grew to millions of users and over $40 million in ARR within months, establishing it as one of the fastest growing tech products in history. All of which, of course, makes Eric the perfect person to talk about building hypergrowth startups in the age of AI. Eric, welcome to the show.
Awesome. Thank you for having me on.
So I thought I'd start by asking you, if every startup can build and launch really quickly, what, in your view, becomes the primary source of competitive advantage?
Yeah, good question. I think this has always probably been the case, but it's maybe a bit clearer. But I think that it's, the founder's ability to learn and embrace reality and learn from reality and adapt and iterate, right, based on that, When I look at the previous things that I've worked on in my career, the things that have worked very well have been things where I very clearly was in tune with reality, as uncomfortable as that is. And I, took those learnings and actually iterated and quickly and went and ran the next experiment based on the results we had found, right? I think that now it's just, instead of before the cycle times of going and building something and putting it out there to find out what reality is this a product that the market actually wants, right? That's so shortened now. And so the skill set is can you face pain and learn from it and then go and iterate and make the next version of it. So I think that's always been the core skill set. Now it's just because you can get so many more hits at bat than you could have before. I think it's even clearer, why it's important.
It's interesting that you just define it and describe it as reality. I haven't quite heard anybody describe it as reality before. I think people often use the euphemism or the proxy data to be data informed or data driven or customer obsessed. Is that a fair analogy, or do you mean something different when you say reality?
Yeah, I think, I guess when I say reality, and maybe it's the same thing, but a PG, I can't remember what essay he said this in, but he described startup founders as economic research scientists or something like that. With the idea as a researcher, your job is to actually try and create reproducible experiments that prove something about the nature of the universe, right? That is repeatable, and therefore true. And in the case of startups, when you're finding looking for product market fit, it's actually really the same process. The reality of the market is as we sit here now on this podcast, there are, thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of possible product market fit ideas and, shapes of products that could be released that would just explode. Obviously, they're so difficult to find that all the obvious ones are, typically the big companies have already eaten up. So as a startup, your job is to find these basically needle in a haystack sort of mappings of a product, your idea, your take on it, your distribution of it into the market that can kind of take off like wildfire. That viewpoint to me is really important as an entrepreneur, because when a scientist is doing research experiments, a lot of them will fail. They won't go anywhere. You will not find out something new about the universe. And it's not a knock on the work being done, right? It's just, your job as a researcher is to keep roving and trying out different things. And the nature of the universe is true. Like it's not like, there's something that doesn't want to be discovered or something. I mean, it's like, it's anyways, so to me, it's like, I like to look at it as reality versus whatever's in my head. My job as the entrepreneur is to be as in tune with that as possible, because that's really the only way you can kind of laser in and figure out where the pocket of opportunity is. So.
Yeah, I want to emphasize this point because I think a lot of founders, first-time founders especially in second, third tier ecosystems, they make this mistake of getting really, really academic about the problem. Like they think about it for a long time. They make long multi-page business plans for a long time. Maybe they're talking to customers and validating through conversation for too long. And I wanted to highlight that that's not, I think, what you're saying. What you're saying is
Not at all.
cycle time is like getting shit into people's hands and seeing what the reality of their behavior is. And then on the other hand, I think some people are in too much contact with reality in the sense that every little bit of breeze shifts them off their hypothesis before they've proven or disproven it. And so they're doing the opposite of the endless validation. They're doing this kind of thrashy, kind of frothy thing. And so I just wanted to highlight that for the audience, as you're talking about putting real things in the world, seeing real behavior, running them as experiments, learning quickly and iterating quickly. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, dead on, right? And yeah, that's exactly right. And it's all about the applied experiments and the results of them. And like, if you measured startups, if you want to measure your progress as a startup in any like uniform way, to me, it's all about shots on goal. So like, how many iterations can you go, like, where you like have an idea, build something to prove it or disprove it, put it out there, get the data points from it, rinse and repeat. How many times can you do that process? The higher the number of times, the higher the likelihood of you finding product market fit. Right. It's just like running an enterprise sales pipeline. Like if you want to close $1 million of sales, if you're an enterprise sales rep, you don't go and talk to like 3 people for the year. Yeah. Like you're talking to 100 or 200 or something. Of those, 75% don't even take the second call. So, you've already cut out some, and then, it's like, you just keep chopping it down, and then, you end up closing 3 or something that, make up the entirety, but there's a bajillion conversations that had to happen in order to weed that down. Yeah. Same thing goes for building products, right? And then and so for founders, it's like, what's going on with vibe coding, and tools like Bolt, right, is you get more shots on goal. Like it would take, a year ago, what you can build now, it would have taken weeks, months to build some of the stuff that you can build in hours or a day. That's insane.
I think that's the interesting thing, Eric. Like, I like the shots on goal analogy, but I prefer the scientist analogy, because it's not like you're taking a bunch of independent shots on goal. You're learning and iterating and learning and iterating. Each attempt informs the next one, right? And so I think you're right that there's nothing fundamentally new. We're talking lean startup methodology, really, but the speed has accelerated massively. And that means that the scientist aspect of what you do, that contact with reality you talk about, that ability to put something out there, learn what you should learn, then apply that to the next experiment. It puts a lot more pressure, in my view. I'm interested in your thoughts on that side of the role of the founder, right? It used to be the case that a lot of this was like operational capacity. Can you build the software? Do you have the funding? Do you have the time to get this done? And in the meantime, you can spend time thinking about the next move. But when that is accelerated, building the software is harder. And it nearly becomes, if you think about theory of constraints, right? That the thing that slows you down nearly is that ability to iterate quickly and make that next attempt really meaningful based on what you learned from the previous one.
Yeah. I think that it's pretty amazing, the shift, right? That's happening here, because before this, there was kind of a great filter of people that could actually participate meaningfully in building startups. And it certainly was just a lot of friction to be able to, embed yourself, to go and try and build things out. Because like you would have needed to, like back 10 years ago or 15 years ago when I came to the Valley, if you weren't technical, you had to like go and, go to networking events, try and meet someone who's technical, befriend them, like try and build something, raise some money so you could like even just keep you guys alive, to spend a couple of months building something. It's just like the amount of friction you kind of have to really want it. And then even through that, the only way to learn, the way that you become a better entrepreneur is by doing this over and over and over again. You learn how to take more accurate shots each time and de-risk things better by just the sheer number of them that you've done. Like it's, why was Michael Jordan just shooting hoops all through the night, like throughout his entire career? It's practice. It's the number of times you're doing the thing that gets you to win.
Today's episode of the Startup Podcast is brought to you by .tech domains. One thing about starting your startup that should be easy but isn't is naming it. Why is it so hard? Because all the good .com domain names are taken. So you end up doing something silly like misspelling it or adding random prefixes or suffixes. No more. Your domain shows your focus and intent, so you should make it sharp, clean, and unmistakably tech with a .tech domain. Head to get.tech/TSP or a registrar like GoDaddy to grab your .tech domain today. That's www.get.tech/TSP for the Startup Podcast. Listen up. I know a lot of you use dev agencies to help build your product. Problem is, a lot of those agencies suck. I've been looking for one I can really endorse, and I finally found one. Warp Development are the powerhouse behind countless successful startups and enterprises for over 22 years. They have 100+ experts who don't just code, they solve business problems. From custom software to AI consulting, Warp delivers results that move your business forward. And they're in your time zone. They have offices in Australia, the United States, and South Africa, so you get local support with global expertise. Are you ready to build something that matters? Visit warpdevelopment.com, that's WARP development.com, and mention the Startup Podcast for a free consultation. That brings us to the next thing we wanted to discuss, which is what does that ideal startup workflow look like in 2025? We can get a little bit more granular. What are the sorts of tools you should be using? How do you actually do this accelerated 0 to 1 with as many shots on goal as possible?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that like the role that Bolt plays, I think in this is very much when you're going and iterating on product market fit, things like Bolt allow you to, because it's like completely integrated. And for the folks that are listening that haven't like used this thing yet, I mean, Bolt is basically, think like ChatGPT, but if it could build full stack web applications and it was like directly integrated with the production host. And so if you once you have an idea for something, you can go to Bolt, say, hey, I want to build a full stack app where I'm, selling subscriptions for XYZ service via Stripe with a backend, and you hit enter, and his 0 shot or after a couple of prompts, you can literally have a SaaS business that is online and actually you're accepting payments, right? And then you can have that deployed in one click, share the link with people, and immediately start getting real user feedback, not on like a prototype like a Figma prototype that's basically JPEGs you click through, but like a real app. Yeah, and then you continue iterating based on user feedback through that. And, so I think that's like, a lot of the product development process, like Bolt and things like Bolt are eating that out. If you've sufficiently done, like product development with Bolt, often you'll need to add more complex functionality. And so you integrate it with Cursor, that sort of thing. You can develop further. And obviously Cursor, it gives you like, 10x or 100x the leverage of, what writing code manually by hand would be. But I think from like a development perspective, I think you're kind of looking at, those are like the kind of the two things that can really accelerate you to market and actually help you find product market fit quickly.
So maybe to sort of paraphrase that one, like it's nearly like a tool like Bolt fits somewhere in the middle between, in the past, you'd be like, okay, we've got wireframes or Figma prototypes. And then to get them to market, we basically have to build the thing, get some developers, write a bunch of code and get it to market. Now we have this sort of intermediate step where we can go from a prompt and, perhaps some mock-ups still, maybe you still use Figma, straight to a usable product, a usable prototype that you can put out into market and iterate on very quickly. That's where you get that acceleration and shots on goal.
Yeah, exactly. And when you're doing like product development, like often, if you're using Figma or something to, show a prototype to someone, the problem is that it's not high fidelity. Like it's not actually real. Like they can give you some level of feedback, but it's not like it's very valuable to know, does this person put in their credit card at this step or not? And you can't get that from like clicking through a wireframe. And like Marty Kagan wrote kind of like one of the, it's called like Inspired. It's like one of the books that people point at for modern product development for software. And one of the key insights from that book is what you really want is the most high fidelity prototype you can put in front of a user if you really want to get the most accurate data back on whether the thing is going in the right direction. obviously the limitation before is it would just take forever and it was very expensive to code a prototype. So of course we would wireframe these things and try and glean some general type of insight, right? From static, mockups or whatever. Now you don't have to.
We have an episode in the back catalog with Marty Kagan talking about these things. So I encourage everybody to go check that out. It's interesting because there is this subtlety along this spectrum. I'd like to just tease it out just a little bit more, right, Eric? So there is the Figma prototype. There's, you design it in pixels and maybe you can click on some stuff. It takes you to another screenshot. There's this kind of higher fidelity prototype. Then there's a production app. And then maybe there is like mature production app that really does all the things. And I was actually a little bit surprised that you mentioned that maybe you start in Bolt and then you take it into Cursor, but you also mentioned, but a Bolt app is not a prototype, or it's more than a prototype. So in your mind, where do these handoffs occur? Or maybe it's a fluid situation and it doesn't really matter so much. Where do you see the natural breakpoints, the natural kind of responsive points where things hand off?
Yeah, totally. I mean, and a lot of it has to do with just the complexity around the code bases today. And like, because I think you fast forward, like, and this is true, like from a year ago, there were tools that, kind of let you prototype, in the same sort of way, but they were very basic. So it was only the most basic of components. Now it's not, right? Because of where CodeGen's at. You fast forward a year or two from now, you're gonna be able to do even more. And so typically what we see is startups in particular, starting greenfield, they will be able to use Bolt to build out much of their product functionality, and they'll be able to interop with Cursor, because Cursor is great for like fine-grained edits or when you're doing very specific things. Like think about Bolt really allows you to go from like 0.0 to 1.0, so like kind of major feature releases very quickly. And then Cursor is great for like your 1.0 to 1.1, 1.2 if you're making more fine-grained edits, right? And then Bolt maybe takes you from 1.2 to 2.0 again or something, right? When you look at like companies that have existing code bases that are reasonably complicated, the problem with those is that getting them to work with the tools like Bolt is that the models are to make sure that the agent is sufficiently accurate and good at really operating on something that's very, very, very large is difficult. And so today you still really need to be able to use Cursor when you're working on that large of a production code base, et cetera. So a lot of like B2B customers we have that are scale ups or Fortune 500s, what they're just using Bolt for is to basically replicate these exact same like flows from their core products and using it as a tool to replace Figma or whatever for prototyping. And then when they validate that, then they just take the code that Bolt made and then they copy it over into their code base, wire it up to whatever the production stuff is, and they're ready to rock, right? It really depends on like the code base and your context and your specific requirements of whether, tools like Bolt can actually service your needs today with the production code base. But at a minimum, it's even just crazy valuable it's way faster to make a prototype in Bolt, and the output again is way higher fidelity in an actual app versus using something like.
Yeah, I think that's relatively clear, right? You maybe you start in Figma if you have a designer who likes to live there, but you very quickly start to prototype in Bolt. I like what you said there. You get to 0 to 1 with Bolt, and then perhaps as you want to mature out of that, maybe you move to something like Cursor. I'm curious, just for my own gratification, do you imagine the category that Bolt is in to evolve upstream to be more mature like Cursor, or a Cursor to go downstream and make it easier to prototype? Or do you imagine these as completely separate categories that have a lot of maturation and a lot of category defining in their own space?
I think it's both. I think right now everyone's looking at everything and going, we could go do that.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's like things that are like not, that's like us and Cursor. And then there's like the AI labs themselves are looking at this stuff. They're like, hey, we could go do that. So everyone's looking to do all of this. And so it's going to be interesting to see how this shakes out and like, okay, who has actually durable advantages here over others where they can provide an experience that no one else can't. And so I certainly think Cursor, I think they've said, hey, we want to go more the direction of like where Bolt is. I think from our side, like our roots as a company, we were doing a web-based IDE before, right? So it wouldn't seem crazy to think that we will pull some stuff off the shelf and have a more cursory type thing people can, eject to. Instead of going to Cursor, it's like, hey, like maybe there's something that's not 100% of Cursor, but it's like pretty darn good and you can use it in the browser still. So I think we're going to come at different angles of the thing. My expectation is that especially with the desktop-based stuff like Cursor, I think there's like kind of tangible use cases where you're using a desktop app versus a web one. And certainly different markets. Like most of the people using Bolt are not developers. They are entrepreneurs, they are PMs, they are designers. These are folks that like don't want to set up a local, they don't even know how to set up a local environment, even if Cursor guides them through it. It's like a whole thing that they have to manage, et cetera. And that's really, that is why we started this company, is we wanted to make it as easy to build full stack apps as using Canva, with the browser being the universal mechanism that really makes that accessible to anyone.
I think this is a really interesting thing, and this is an area I wanted to dive into, Eric, and maybe even challenge you a little bit, right? Because there are these two models, right? You know, if you talk about Cursor and Bolt, and for those listening, what's kind of the difference? To me, it's that you have tools like Bolt and competitors such as V0, Lovable, even Canva are in this game now, which is, I guess what I call it top down, right? Which is you say, okay, we have some prompts, we have some stuff, build me an app that does this thing. And then you have tools like Cursor, like Windsurf, GitHub Copilot, which I would consider to be bottom up, right? Which is like you're writing code and it started off with like smart autocomplete and then started to become agentic. So you've got sort of top down and you're getting, you know, more and more granular. You've got the bottom up getting more and more agentic. And yes, you know, at a certain point you meet in the middle. But as you say, Eric, like the folks who use the top down tools tend not to be developers. The folks who use bottom up tools do tend to be developers. And I guess I've got a bunch of questions about this. I'm not quite sure what order we ask these in, but I think they're all related, right? Which is, how far can you go using vibe coding or whatever you want to call it without those technical dev skills? And what does that mean for the composition of a founding team?
Yeah, the answer is extremely far, right? I mean, it also depends on your ambition and like what ideas you're pursuing. We've had some very complicated things built with both like 3D modeling software and stuff where it's like, I don't know how you prompt that, but they did. And we have built-in integrations with Stripe and Supabase, like for auth and database and payments, like that stuff, you know, literally in 5 minutes, you can have a SaaS app accepting money, et cetera, right? So yeah, I think for startups, I don't think that you really, in many cases, I don't think that you need necessarily a technical founder off the bat, or I mean, heck, maybe even at all, to go and really build this stuff and actually get it into production. If I were advising, like if I had a friend who was starting a company that was non-technical today, what I would recommend them to do is go and use Bolt to go and prototype that and become good enough at using it and the surrounding tools to be dangerous, and put them in touch with a developer that'll work with them by the hour to help debug, help get them unblocked, et cetera. That would be my recommendation for them starting their own thing. Because, you know, not saying that they eventually don't want to pull on a technical person or co-founder, but it's far easier to do that when you actually have proven the concept is valid. And unless you have someone that's technical that wants to work with you or whatever, but, and even in that case, it's like, why have that person write a whole bunch of stuff by hand if you can blast through it in minutes to hours?
So Eric, I've recently gone deep on my vibe coding journey. I used to program, never became a production grade engineer, you know, more product and design guy. And I started using one of your competitors. It was not Bolt. And it was shocking to me how quickly I could create a great user experience and static screens that looked amazing. It was like the most intuitive front-end engineer I'd ever worked with. Then I asked it to add a back end and add login and sign up and image upload. And, you know, it was a sort of a pseudo social network type app. And it started to grind and sort of say that it fixed things, and then it didn't fix things. And, you know, oh, the image upload is working now. And, oh, no, still doing the same thing. It doesn't work.
You should have used Bolt.
I was gonna say, it's not that you didn't use Bolt. I mean, that's what I'm hearing from this whole story.
Well, that's precisely what I'm trying to figure out. And Eric, I'm deliberately not mentioning the competitor because I'd like to talk about this in the abstract. Do you think there is a material difference between some of these players where some of them are really more prototypey than real full stack application builders? And or I've heard some kind of sentiments around, hey, sometimes these things go down a rabbit hole and they actually get wrapped around the axle and you actually have to start again, or you have to back right out. Or is there a pattern that works generally well? Like you have to give it a broad requirements document. You can't iterate your way to an answer. So to help me understand How do I avoid these dead ends? Is it the tool? Is it the process? Is it sometimes a rat hole you have to back out of? What happens there?
You hit all the main things, right? And I think like I certainly to start off, there are some of these tools, the agents of these tools, they're not all cut from the same cloth. Some are just better designed and tested and engineered than others. That is certainly true. Huge swing on this as well. And I'll be very like, in some sense, maybe speaking against my own book, because I'm incentivized maybe here to say we're the best, you should use, I'm not going to like that. I think tangibly, like the realities of this are the foundation models have a giant swing over how accurate the output of these things can be. There is, and that's like, it's like an order of magnitude, like a 10x swing on how good these things can be. So whenever there's an improvement, like when Sonnet 4 came out, it is a monster improvement in how all the agents can work, right? Mm-hmm. Then there's like maybe a 2 to maximum 3x swing on top of that of how well the agent is designed and that sort of thing. But again, it's like you're talking about tectonic shifts when the foundation models come out versus still it's like, a 2 to 3x swing is meaningful, right? So it is a noticeable difference between these things. But the foundation models have the biggest impact. That all said, right? What you're describing around, sometimes the agent will just kind of get caught in like a rabbit hole. That is true. Like that's the problem, with LLMs in general is just they're not deterministic. So like 99 times out of 100, and these things may just crush whatever's getting thrown at them. And then one time out of 100, it just gets confused in circles, right? And I've seen this happen with ours and other people's stuff. And in those cases, what I certainly do is exactly what you described, which is like, if I'm going down like some path where it's like, I've gotten like 3 or 4 or 5 prompts in and this thing is just not making progress, I just roll it back. Cause I'm like, okay, something went seriously wrong here. I need to take a different approach to this, right? And what tends to work really well is just trying to scope the workout in a way that is small, sensible, and where you're not just throwing a ton of stuff onto it all at once. Just like humans, it's like, I kind of treat it as if I'm sitting next to a developer. And then what I wouldn't do sitting next to a developer is be like, all right, so here's like 10 things we got to go and do. They'd be like, okay, we're looking at a homepage together. Let's change that thing to be that color. Great. We'll change this thing. Yeah, I mean, you just like really laser it in.
So you are talking about small. That's really, I guess, the crux of my question. I guess is it better to give it a large, PRD for want of a better word, like here is the architecture of what I'm building, take a big stab at that, or is it better to say, no, that button up there, change it to green. That thing I wanted to upload at a high resolution. This thing over here, I wanted to propagate to all the pages, and do it like one iteration at a time. What's your experience?
Yeah, I mean, if you have a really good PRD, if you invest in a PRD, that can accelerate you. Like on the first prompt, where you say, "Hey, go and build all this stuff out." Right? I think from there, like if the model or the agent, misses some amount of what's in the PRD, then you go and you get surgical on, okay, here's like this specific thing, et cetera. And you go and follow that down, right? And not that I don't want to advocate for people using PRDs and that sort of thing, but I think that like certainly laying that out at the beginning of the project, great. As you're going and really honing in on different functionality, et cetera, you want to be very specific and kind of laser in on those things versus stacking up a whole bunch of stuff that it's going to have to go and do, right?
Yeah, I think this is where it gets really interesting, Eric. And, you mentioned you imagine that you're sitting next to a developer telling them what to do. And one of the things I've been thinking about is that a lot of non-technical founders, they use dev agencies, right? Before Bolt.new and everything else, right? They use dev agencies and they still do. And a lot of the time they get really bad results. Now, there are 2 reasons for that. One is that a lot of the agencies are just not that scrupulous, not that good at their jobs. But there's another reason, which is that the non-technical founder in particular doesn't really know what to ask for or how to ask for it, right? So they give crappy instructions, crappy directions, they get a crappy outcome, and it's really disappointing, right? So there's an art to prompting, right? We've talked about this more generally, right? There's an art to prompting humans. There's an art to prompting dev agencies. And in the same sense, there's an art to prompting these vibe coding tools or even prompting things like Cursor that is non-trivial. And I think that's something that's really worth talking about because these tools are incredible and they feel magical. In some ways they are magical, but they're not mind readers, right?
Yeah.
If you give it a vague prompt, it will give you something that is not maintainable or iterable. It will hallucinate a bunch of solutions and so on. And like you said, a lot of it goes down to the foundation models and, the LLM architecture itself. So if you want to use a tool like this to get a good result, you actually need to be quite specific in what you're asking for. Again, I think that goes back a little bit to founder skill set, but perhaps, Eric, you can give some actionable advice for folks. I think tools like Bolt.new and your competitors, the vibe coding tools, they make it so low friction to get started that I think it can be that people can miss this, right? It's like you go to the front page of these things, you sign up with Google or whatever, and it's just like you've got a prompt, you've got an empty box to say, what do you want me to build today? You type in a couple of sentences and it builds the thing for you. But that's not really, is it, how you should be using these tools if you're building a startup?
For sure. Yeah. And that was the interesting thing. Like, so when we launched Bolt, I mean, we were a developer tool before we launched Bolt. We thought Bolt was going to be used primarily by developers. So when we launched it and in the subsequent weeks, I mean, we had this explosion of people. I mean, it was like just tens of thousands of customers came online like the first month. And the majority of them were not developers. And we were like, what is going on here? Yeah, but yet they were building incredible things. And what we ended up finding is that the people that are the most successful with Bolt actually are people that in their either current or previous jobs were responsible for instructing developers what to build. So PMs or people who run web agencies, right? Like these sorts of folks where their entire job is they know like what it takes to build a great product, and they are having to chunk out work to developers to actually go and build it. And when things are when the developer builds it wrong, they are giving feedback in a structured way with enough context where the developer's like, oh, okay, I understand what you're saying and how this should function and maybe what the issue is. I'll go take care of it.
All right, we can end the episode right here. This is the rise of product managers. We're done here, right, guys?
That's what really blew our mind, is that the entire like software world order is getting rewritten here. And, you look at big companies as well. I mean, how this is not reflected in the org charts yet. What's going to happen here? I mean, PMs, within 5 years, right? PMs are going to be quote unquote writing code. It doesn't make any sense. Like what they type into a Jira ticket and assign to a developer to do, why they can just hit enter in a prompt and then it can just do it. So that would free up the developers to work on higher cognitive load tasks. So, I mean, it strikes me as just so obvious that's where the stuff is heading.
All the best .coms are taken or crazily overpriced, so you settle on a workaround domain for your website. Don't compromise. Get a clean, sharp .tech domain that instantly says, this is a tech startup. Grab yours at get.tech/TSP for the Startup Podcast or via domain registrars like GoDaddy. Looking for a tech partner to scale your business? Here's one I can personally endorse, Warp Development. With 22 years of experience and 100 plus experts, they deliver custom software and AI solutions that drive results. Visit warpdevelopment.com and mention the Startup Podcast for a free consultation.
It strikes me as just so obvious that's where the stuff is heading.
I'd like to challenge that a little bit because I've been playing with a bunch of these tools. Not just playing, I've been using them, and I think what I'm seeing is actually a real need for a convergence of skills. Okay, so, it's funny. Chris joked about ending the episode there because he comes from a product management background. I'm more of an engineer. So I guess we're showing our biases a little bit. But I've been using tools like Windsurf and also some of the vibe coding tools. And what I find is that it's all great until it's not. Chris sort of talked about the doom loops as well, right? And I think this is particularly problematic. Like if you want to build a straightforward CRUD web app, great, it will do that for you, especially if you prompt it well. If you do really standard things like accepting payments with Stripes and doing auth, it will do that well. But when you start doing slightly more exotic things with third-party APIs that are perhaps newer or not as well documented, then they will just hallucinate to hell and back, and the API calls will fail, and it cannot debug its way out. In other words, you still need to debug the stuff. And ultimately, I think if you're building something more sophisticated, you need to be able to go down to the code level and understand what is going on. I just, maybe, like you said, maybe in 5 years, right, these models get better and better and better, and maybe this problem goes away. But as of today, I think these tools are amazing for prototyping, and they can go beyond that if you have the technical skills to actually dive in under the hood. And so Actually, what I'm seeing is that it's always been valuable to be a product-minded engineer or an engineering-minded product manager. But I think that unicorn, that converged sort of product manager engineer, this is really what you need to be now, because when you have these tools that can give you this massive extra leverage, when you're like, okay, I can move really fast. I can go from an idea to execution really quickly, but then I need to be able to debug that. That means that you kind of need to be able to do both to at least a reasonable level. To me, this is part of a longer term trend. I think as we've had web frameworks and, more and more of this stuff that helps developers build quickly, the rise of the product engineer has been going for a while, right? Like having someone who's just a pure back end person, unless you're at a big company, that's not so interesting anymore. But I think now it's just even more important.
I think this comes down ultimately to mindset and perspective. There's a reason why it's important and valuable to typically have a difference between your chief product officer and your chief technology officer, and your chief marketing officer and your chief product officer, and your head of revenue and your product manager. These people have a different way of thinking about the world. And when you put them into different roles, they have a different perspective and priority and lens on what is most important in that given moment. And they have a completely different intent in the room. And so you can't just conflate and confuse all of these brains and ideas together in one thing. While the LLM can do a lot for you, and these tools can do a lot for you, it's ultimately, at least for the foreseeable future, going to be about leverage and about having the right people in the room and then amplifying their superpowers with the tools, with the marketing tools, with the engineering tools, with the design tools, with the sales tools, and so on. And so, we've talked on this show. We coined the concept. We like to take credit for the 3-person billion-dollar company, and it's in the water now. It's everywhere. And I've always said, I don't know, it's 3 people. I think it's more like 7. It's an executive team. There's the person who thinks about marketing all day long. There's a person who thinks about sales all day long. There's a person who thinks about product all day long. And there's even somebody who thinks about engineering and technical architecture and problem solving all day long. And there's someone who orchestrates those things and someone who thinks about operations. And so I think when you have one person per function, per organ of the business, and then you can supercharge them with some more junior people or some sidekicks and some engineers, I think that's ultimately the way this goes in the foreseeable future.
Yeah, that seems reasonable. I mean, and I think it's like, yeah, it's less of, and I'm an engineer by background, right? So like, I don't see like any of these professions going away, quote unquote. And I think I certainly agree with the thought of like becoming more proficient on any of these, just like it's always been actually. Like if you are a developer that actually understands design and product to some or large degree, that is huge. I mean, that overlap is extremely valuable. And vice versa, especially now, like these tools are just, what's happening here is just a multiplier on, whatever skill set you have, but especially the crossover is even more so, right? Like it was a multiplier before and a multiplier now,
But there's something subtle here that I think is worth teasing out a little bit more. It's not just about an engineer who understands design or an engineer who understands product. It's about, oftentimes you need 2 separate people. Because when you're an engineer who understands design, you are in the mindset of yes. You're in the mindset of building. You're in the mindset of how does this functionally work? You're not necessarily in the mindset of I need to run a user experiment or a user experience lab around this. I need to ask myself, is this even the right metaphor? Or is this even solving the right problem? Is this problem even in the same category as what I think it is? If you are both the engineer and the designer, you're much more likely to just keep building features, keep building stuff. Whereas when you're the designer, you can say, hang on a second, I need to go talk to some customers. I needed to ask some more existential questions. There's the healthy tension there and a mindset, a delta in the mindsets that I think is going to continue to be valuable than just conflating everything into one person.
That seems sensible, especially if you're talking like the 7-person billion-dollar company, sort of like absolutely right at the founding stage, absolutely like that. That makes a lot of sense to me.
Let me talk about the counterexample that I'm thinking of. You go to a sales meeting. A salesperson goes to a sales meeting and they talk to the customer, and the customer's like, "We want these 5 extra checkboxes and these 17 different features." Even as a product person in the sales meeting, I'm likely to feel like, yeah, we want to win this account. And yeah, that seems like an easy thing to do. And yes, we're absolutely going to do that, Mr. Customer. But when you're not in the room, you're like, hey, that's not on strategy. That's not what our product does. This is not the right kind of customer for us. No, we don't want to do that. And so if you're a sales guy, vibe coder, designer guy, you're going to walk out of that sales meeting and you're going to add it to your product and you're going to end up with a piece of shit. You need the creative tension in the team.
That's a really good, that's an excellent analogy, or like point of like why you need the different functions still, you know?
Eric, going back to the software engineering hat, I guess, and you said, you're a software engineer and you've built something at a massive scale. So you know the importance of the stuff beyond the code, right? The maintainability, version control, testing, managing tech debt, documentation, observability, all of these things that are the difference between, hey, I've created a prototype and I've created a scalable, maintainable, robust production system. So again, and especially maybe if folks don't have a strong technical background, how are you thinking within Bolt about how you start to support these things more effectively so that we really do get to that point of non-technical folks being able to build, run, and own systems like that?
Yeah, and you're saying like building like durable and scalable applications that that can grow to millions of people or something like that.
Well, even before that, let's put scalability to one side. Just durable production systems that don't have outages, don't have security issues, that don't have a lot of random bugs, stuff like that.
I think that a lot of that is, I mean, today, like we use Bolt ourselves for shipping things, especially like to production, just ancillary for like we were throwing like the world's largest hackathon right now, right? And so we made a sign up form that was entirely built with Bolt that is posting to Supabase, et cetera, et cetera. That's like the production system we use for that. And I don't know, there's like some tens of thousands of people that have gone and ran through this thing. And so I think you look at that and it's like, sure, it's like a small piece of functionality, but it's amazing for us though, because it's completely bespoke. It's integrated exactly how we need it to be integrated, et cetera, et cetera. From a security perspective, I think that's a real thing that like, there's companies that are saying that, we've figured out secure vibe coding. And that's just not like, the problem is that this thing's punching out code. Like even at the most security conscious companies in the world, people make mistakes. It gets through code review of the best people in the world, and there's 0 days, right? So to think that there's some silver bullet for this is 100,000% secure is complete hogwash. And there's certainly automated checks you can put in, right? That certainly make it better. And I think today we're in the early days of this. I think the security thing is actually really the only meaningful thing as far as ability to scale without a technical person at all involved. It's like, yeah, if you're accepting payments, it's probably a good idea to have a developer take a look at the code and, have a pen test done on it or something. But there's also AI pen testing services now. So it's kind of one of these fun things where it's like there's these new problems that have to be solved, but also the tectonic plates that have shifted also help solve those, and in perhaps an automated way. But tangibly, I would tell anyone that's vibe coding stuff, if you're putting things in production that are dealing with sensitive data in any way, you should probably like get a developer to pay him by the hour to audit the thing. You should run, there's lots of stuff that you can run on repos for free that will audit things. There's pen testing, both human and AI you can do. And so we're going to be doing some stuff in that arena built into Bolt. But, I think tangibly, it's like, this is, these are the same problems that we have with regular human software development today,
Maybe when it comes, like, let's get right down to the most practical thing, which is, how do I choose one of these tools? Now, of course, I'm sure for the purpose of today, we're going to say, Bolt is the best for all use cases. But is there flavors of this that like, hey, this one's better for e-commerce, or this one's better for social, or this one's better for B2B SaaS? Or is there some other way to categorize them? Or is there just find the tool that you resonate with, that you think is best built and, is iterating the hardest and fastest? Or how should we choose our vibe coding, rapid prototyping Bolt-like tool?
Yeah, honestly, I would just recommend everyone to try all of these things, because, it's not immediately obvious to me yet that there's any specific grouping of like ICP around any of these tools. A lot of it, comes down to just like what tool gets you the farthest, has the best output, is the most reliable, et cetera. And I think we do definitely a great job in all those dimensions. But yeah, that's really my recommendation is just try these things out and you take your idea and go. All these things have a free tier, so you'll get a good sense, just on the free tier of these things. And they're also like cheap enough even for the non-free tier, like the next tier. For us, it's like $20. It's like, you'll find out within $20 if this thing's worth your time and worth further investment as a tool to really accelerate you.
Spoken like a man who believes that his product will stand out once tested.
Yeah, and if not, email me, eric@bolt.new. That's I want to hear, right? But I think just being intellectually honest about it, I think that's I think it's just good to like go and try out all these different tools and and that goes for anything too. It's like it's good to be aware of when you're making a decision on these things, just like trying out all the different options and seeing what works for you and kind of digging in, et cetera. And I genuinely want to hear from people if they have feedback,
Yeah, that's great. And I think that's really good advice, Eric. Like, like you said, it's always been true that it's great to try things out, but with AI tools, that is just so much more the case, because I think unlike traditional software, traditional SaaS, there's so much of this qualitative, right? It's not just like who checks the most boxes on a checklist. It's how well does it actually work? And you have to get that feel for that. How well does it work for your use case? So I absolutely second that idea that you should try these things out. And, it's a little bit scary to me, the number of different services I've signed up for just in the last few weeks of seriously attempting to build software using AI tooling, because as you say, they make it really easy and it's so important to just try them out. So that's something as a founder, actually, that I think we've mentioned before in this pod. Part of your role now as a founder isn't just grinding and hustling, it's learning about these tools because they're moving so fast. If you don't make time to try these different things out, then you're kind of being penny wise and pound foolish, right? You really need to make time, carve time out of your busy day when you've got a million different things to do to actually play with these things and see what works. But Eric, I think that really good advice notwithstanding, I'd love to get your take on, is there a particular philosophy or insight or approach to creating the tool at Bolt that you feel stands out or differentiates you from your competitors?
Yeah, like what functionality sets or what that people come to us for that other folks like don't have, you mean?
Yeah, something like that. Or the flavor, do you focus in on like more accurate, memory, or I guess when you're thinking internally, like I'm sure you do. And we've been, it's particularly clear that you're in a highly competitive space with a bunch of tools that, at least on the surface, do similar things. And so you want to stand out. Like you said, when people take your advice and see which one works best, you want them to choose Bolt. So what are the things you're thinking about internally to make that true?
I think that reliability is key. I mean, so that's like there's kind of a longer story here, but like we've been around for a company 8 years now. And for the first 7 years before Bolt, we were building this technology that lets you run dev environments inside of a browser tab using WebAssembly, which makes it extremely reliable, zero latency, very secure. And we're the only company in the world that's got this stuff at this point. And everyone else are using, cloud VMs, which have a lot of issues. There's latency, they will get frozen. So when you use these other services, the downtime and the reliability can be really bad. The problem with that is it's like, imagine if you went to Figma and like 1 out of every 5 times, your Figma document just wouldn't load. And there was no, other than contacting support and saying my Figma won't open, there was no way to kind of get that thing to like work, right? That's kind of what's going on with the other web-based tools in the space right now, primarily because like you just think about the problem set. If we, everyone in the space wants to have 100 million people a month, using their service, okay? Like for text to app things. That's ChatGPT's there. If you're going to spin up a dev environment for every single person, that means you need 100 million VMs, right? There's not even 100 million VMs you can rent on this planet. Like that's the fundamental issue. But there are 100 million end user devices you can run the compute on. And that's what our technology does and why we've been able to scale really well and seamlessly where others have had trouble. So I think that's kind of like fundamentally like number one, you come to the service, it works, right? It's reliable. Number two, beyond that is like when you actually tell this thing what you want it to do, it's a smooth experience. You actually have real integrations that are one click. It's actually outputting beautiful apps that are something you can actually put into production, et cetera. I mean, it does that really fast. Like you're not sitting there waiting for 15, 20 minutes. Some of these other things literally take that long. They say, all right, go grab a coffee and come back, or we'll send you a text when this thing is done. And it's like, that's great. But the problem is, so every iteration is like a 20, 30 minute jump potentially, right? Whereas with Bolt, you're talking about, less than a minute or two or something. So anyway, so it's like, I think the reliability, the output, like I was on a live stream a couple of weeks ago. Someone in the chat was like, how easy is it to actually spin up a site where you're accepting payments with Stripe? And I was like, let's just build one now from the first prompt. Let's build a course site where we can sell our course online. And in 5 minutes, and then from not having anything, it was online, deployed with Stripe, where you can put in your credit card and get access to a Rick Roll video. And I don't know, like that would take a month, like 5 years ago. But that's the testament of the work our team's been doing of just how smooth can you make it front to back to build out a real, MVP product that you can actually launch and accept money and rapidly prototype, et cetera,
You mentioned you've been around for 8 years, which is a really interesting data point, right? The startups are often about momentum. They often start to age out. People are like, oh, you've been doing this for 3 or 4 or 5 years and you haven't hit a hockey stick curve yet. So I'm curious about that journey of getting from there to here, and the moment when you became an overnight success after 8 years of like, now everyone's paying attention to you and you're in a hot category, and how did you notice and catch that wave? Walk us through a little bit of that story of how it felt and what you had to do to make it happen.
Yeah, I mean, the first 3 or 4 years of the company, it was basically purely building out this core technology. I mean, it was like a classic deep technology bet where it wasn't clear if it was even going to be possible to do what we were doing. Like we had friends that work on Chrome or whatever that were like, yeah, this doesn't seem like this is going to be possible to do, right? These are the people that build browser engines, and we're trying to, make an operating system that'll run in a browser engine. But we got it to work. And the first product that we built around this was an IDE, because this was before, and this is 2021. This is before generative AI was a thing in any meaningful way, at least. So from there, us and a lot of other companies, like Replic's an example of one of our peers, they were going after the cloud-based IDE market, similar to what our product was doing. And it ended up being a mirage of a market. Like there just wasn't product market fit for anybody. Developers don't want to leave their local environments, turns out, And so us and Replit went through a similar story, actually, where things were rough for us and them, but so last year, we actually, at the end of the year, we were going to start spinning down the company because we've been around for 7 years. We still have more than half the money we'd ever raise in the bank, but it's like, if there's no clear path here, what are we doing? We should go and get acquired or something and, work on something bigger than what we're up to. We want to turn, I think the job of the entrepreneur though, is to turn over every stone possible. And so we were like, what are all the interesting ideas we have? And so Bolt was one of them. And then we actually tried building Bolt in February of 24. And at that time, OpenAI's models were the frontier best ones, but they weren't good enough. Like the code that they outputted often had errors. The design output was terrible and it would hallucinate a ton. And so we're like, okay, this is a cool idea. We'll put it on the shelf. Maybe this stuff will improve and we could come back to this. Lo and behold, 3 months later, we got an early look at the Sonnet 3.5 stuff from Anthropic. And seeing the output, I was like, holy hell, this is completely different from anything I've ever seen from any of the other players here. We can build a product around this. And so we had no idea how big of a deal it was going to be for us and Bolt and whatever. But it was one of 5 or 6 things we tried last year. And the other ones were great. They were cool. But and we had a lot of good early feedback from the product development process. But they just didn't have the commercial pull that Bolt did, obviously. And then we launched Bolt, and obviously that kind of changed everything for us, and we didn't shut down. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of a, to contrast that with, there's another competitor in the cloud IDE space. It was the most direct competitor we had for 7 years. And we were constantly trading blows with these guys. They were excellent at building products, these guys. And they ran out of money 2 weeks before, and then they got basically acquired for parts 2 weeks before we launched Bolt. And so just to again, like if you measure anything, like when you're looking for product market fit, you optimize for how many shots on goal can you take. And that's not just, obviously you want to condense, your iteration cycles, because that's one way to get more shots on goal. The other is expanding your runway and how long and how much grit you have to stay in the game, because often things will change quickly and rapidly and violently, in ways you would never expect. And so that, for us, and then that same thing happened with Replit too. Like those guys, stayed in the game, made the, after we had kind of proven out that there was value here, they started really investing in their agent thing. But yeah, it's been kind of a crazy roller coaster.
It's funny how in the startup game and in every game, in life, there is advice in every direction, right? There's contradicting advice in every direction, right? The one of the axioms or the cliches is fail fast. Yet at the same time, it's you want to survive long enough to have shots on goal and maybe catch one of these waves that you didn't know was coming. Wisdom is knowing which one to apply in each circumstance, and there's a little bit of luck that plays a role in all of it as well. Eric, thank you so much for joining us and walking us through this. I think, as Yaniv said at the very beginning, the game has changed and the rate of execution has accelerated and will only accelerate further. And so when we've been talking about shots on goal, we've been talking about iterations, we've been talking about, finding product market fit, the cycle times is getting faster and faster and faster. And so if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a founder, or you're a wannabe founder and you're thinking like, I need a technical co-founder, not anymore. And if you think it takes months to build something, not anymore. So start executing and go faster, I think is the point of the episode.
You should still get a technical co-founder though. Thanks so much, Eric. We really appreciate your time and congrats on your success. I think it is a really valuable lesson, an overnight success that took 7 years in the making, right? And it must be a pretty surreal feeling for you. You've learned a lot, and thanks so much for sharing it with our audience. If people do want to learn more about you and what you do, or of course, try your product, where should they go?
We'll head over to bolt.new. That's where you can find Bolt. We have all of our social links on the website you can find there. And then for me personally, you can find me on X. I'm Eric Simons on X. I'm an avid tweeter or poster, whatever it is on that platform.
Well, whatever the hell it is now.
And if folks have feedback for you on the product, they can email you directly at
Eric@bolt.new.
And Chris, how about you? If people want to find you online, where should they go?
Yeah, you can learn about my advisory work at chrissaad.com/advisory or all the social media at Chris Saad. How about you, Yaniv?
I'm on LinkedIn trying to make it a less boring place. I love getting connection requests from TSP listeners, so hit me up, let me know you're from the pod, and I will accept your request. All right, thanks guys. That was a really great episode, and appreciate you coming on, Eric.
Appreciate it, guys. Oh yeah.
Today's episode of the Startup Podcast was brought to you by .tech domains. Naming your startup should be easy, but it isn't, because all the good .com names are taken or wildly overpriced. No more. You don't have to compromise. Your domain shows your focus and intent, so make it sharp, clean, and unmistakably tech with a .tech domain. How do you do that? Head to www.get.tech/TSP or a registrar like GoDaddy and grab your .tech domain today. Get.tech/TSP for the Startup Podcast, so they know you came from us. This episode of the Startup Podcast was brought to you by Warp Development. I know a lot of you rely on dev agencies to help build your product. Problem is, a lot of these agencies suck. Ask me how I know. I've been looking for one that I can really endorse, and I have finally found one. Warp Development are the powerhouse behind countless successful startups and enterprises for over 22 years. They have over 100 experts who don't just code, they solve business problems alongside you. From custom software to AI consulting, Warp Development delivers results that move your business forward. And they're in your time zone. They have offices in Australia, the United States, and South Africa, so you get local support with global expertise. Are you ready to build something that matters? Visit warpdevelopment.com. That's WARP development.com, and mention the Startup Podcast for a free consultation.